Now, for those not in the know, this is the second decade focused on advancing African women, the African decade of the African woman. So from 2020 until 2030, the African Union has declared this again another decade in which to try to look into issues that have been impeding the growth and development of African women. So still, we are talking about structural, social, cultural, and economic injustices that they continue to face. So how do we advance from where we are, and who needs to do what? To help me talk about those issues today is Aya Chebbi. She is the African Union Youth Envoy, and she joins me from Tunis. Aya, thanks for your time. I think let's begin by just perhaps outlining what the African Union broadly has been trying to do to uplift women across the continent.
Thank you very much for having me. And it's really important to address this issue, especially now during the pandemic. I think it's been a big step that our leaders decided in February during the Heads of States and Government meeting assembly to make this decade for women financial inclusion and empowerment. And we know that we already have the African Union strategy on women empowerment. We have the Protocol of African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Rights of Women, which is one of the most progressive instruments and documents, not only in Africa, but in the world on human rights. And unlike other documents, it details really substantive human rights for women, covering spectrum of civil, political, economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights. So I think we're not lacking instruments or any frameworks. We have the right policies in place, at least at the continental level, but we need to move on to national action plans. We need to move on from aspiration to implementation. We need to move on to contextualize the different issues at the community level and address them. And of course, there are still many, many challenges for women, especially young women who have kind of double crime of being young and being a female at the same time. And still in 2020, we face very difficult challenges on the continent. So the frameworks we have and what the African Union does at the continental level provides a foundation and provides the policy framework that we can start from, but the real work has to be done at the community level.
Yeah, so we are going to come back and devote a lot of time to talk about the issues in particular that are in the path of young women. But I wanted to know first, in terms of the advancement of the programs that you are talking about, the frameworks that you say the African Union has agreed on, how far that has gone in terms of implementation.
We are seeing quite good advancement, actually, because we have from 5 years ago until now, we have now about 30 and over 30 countries on the continent who have national action plan, and these plans address the AU strategy on women empowerment, but also the women, peace and security agenda and the financial agenda and needs. So I think it's a good advancement that many countries now have finally developed and adopted their national plans, and they're moving into implementation. It's a good sign. In terms of financial inclusion and this decade, this is the first year to start mobilizing for this decade of financial inclusion. There has been also funds, continental funds for women that were set up between African Union and East and Economic Community Commission for Africa. There has been a couple of initiatives as well between the United Nations and the African Union, like the African Women Leaders Network, which brings together African women leaders, both from across generations, actually, to ensure also women political participation, and that we're not just making decisions, whether on finance, on economic, on social affairs, without including women at the decision making. So it's a process, but I think it's been quite a progress. And that does not mean that there are not challenges that, especially now during the pandemic, can take us a little bit back from what we have gained as women as well in terms of the agenda and where we want to go. So I would say we are moving in a right direction.
Yeah, I want to get a sense in terms of geography where we are making progress and where we are not making progress. In my opening remarks, I spoke about the challenges that we see really across the whole spectrum. So we're talking on environmental issues, we're talking structural, we're talking cultural, we're talking economic. Are you seeing even progress in terms of those countries that are coming on board and saying we want to be part of this and see our young girls and women advancing?
Yeah, it's really interesting in terms of women's rights and women's empowerment. We can't say that one region is doing well and another region is not. We can't categorize it like we do, for example, on peace and security. We can take the Sahel region and talk about it in particular,
Yeah.
because, for example, I take North Africa, where I am today, here in Tunis. There has been a lot of progressive discussions on women's rights. There have been laws that changed since the revolution in Tunisia in favor of women's rights. There have been a discussion about equal inheritance, and it's tabled in the parliament. But on the other hand, if we look at Egypt, we still see high rates of female genital mutilation, and we're still addressing high rates of child marriage. So two countries in the same region who have different analysis of where we are at with women's rights.
Yeah.
Same if we go to other regions in West Africa. Some countries have made progress, but some countries in settings like Burkina Faso, Niger, northern Nigeria, places where it's even more difficult to address women's rights, because it's not only about then economic or social or cultural addressing these issues. It's more complicated with peace and security. Same if we go to East and Southern. So I don't think in women's rights, we cannot say this region is doing well and this region is not. We can take case studies of countries who have made progress. We are proud to have, Rwanda has in one of the parliaments in the whole world, actually, that has most women in the world in parliament. We're proud of different case studies and how countries change laws that are progressive and that protect women. But overall, I think we still need to do much more, because the learning among region, and that's the role of the African Union, when our countries meet at the African Union, when they exchange, when they validate, when the ministers of gender meet, when the ministers of youth meet and validate these framework, it's also an opportunity to say, this is what we've been doing and this is how it's working. This is the programs that we implemented, and this is a monitoring and evaluation process. I think that's what we need to do. We need to exchange more in a Pan-African space, and support more women where countries have done better, to also implement those laws and move forward with the agenda.
Yeah, I like the fact that you are being very frank and we are talking about these issues in a way that does not in any way obfuscate or try and hide our words. Let's get them out into the open. So to that extent, I wanted you to critique for me, if you will, the work that has been done at the AU level before we talk about the national priorities. What are you seeing in terms of helping you get this work done as a young woman yourself?
I think, I come to the African Union in a very good timing, because I feel so blessed. I come in where a lot of women have opened doors for young women like me to be in leadership. I don't think we would have imagined to have a first youth envoy to be female if we didn't have parity in the African Union in the commissioners. So I work with all these commissioners, with the special envoy in women, peace and security, with other envoys and ambassadors of the AU to different countries, and I feel grateful to be in the space where I can look up to other women who are giants of our continent, who open the space for me. So I would say, in terms of looking at myself in a space of leadership where I would see, oh, I'm the only woman, I don't feel that, because I see a lot of other women who open the door. But in terms of young women, that is the issue, because even though women have progressed in the agenda, and I always have these discussion with commissioners at the African Union and special envoy in women, peace and security, that the youth movement needs to learn from the women movement. How did you do it? How did you reach quotas? How did you reach parity? We need that for young people. And so as much as I see more women in the space and in leadership and taking the decision in the African Union, I see oftentimes myself as the only young woman in the decision-making table, and the one, talking to old men generally, and trying to convince them why they have to care about their youthful population and why they have to understand that young women have particular issues within the women's rights agenda.
Yeah, Aya, we are all learning all the time without question. I mean, even us, I mean, you can see I'm old enough to be your father, but there are certainly many things that I don't understand about young people and young women in general, and so we are catching up. We're talking about the general broad themes here in terms of advancement of our women. I want us to get into the different spaces where women work and where women reside. So, in terms of the focus that you're seeing from the African Union, are we getting enough focus, for instance, women in the rural areas? And also, I wanted us to make a difference with women who are in the workplace. The focus that we are getting in terms of trying to help those people, is it there?
Mm. Yeah, so we actually did the past 3 months virtual African Union Youth Consultation series and we had 3 of them largely about young women. And for sure, the economic aspect and the economic impact is top priority. In every single survey we run, in every single consultation we run, everything comes back to economic priorities. Everything comes back to job security, to livelihoods. And then from there, you can, break it down to aspects of accessibility. And as you rightfully said, rural women has particular challenges. The digital divide, where some have access and some don't have access, especially during this time where education is disrupted, job loss has increased. So if we unpack what is within our priorities, there are a lot of issues that we need to deal with. But I would say the main focus and priority right now is economic. We know that even before the pandemic, Africa had to generate 12 million jobs, for example, for young people, but we have only 3 million who go into formal jobs. And within those, we have women less going into the workforce than their counterparts. Imagine now with the pandemic, the losses of jobs, and 60% of jobs in Africa are vulnerable and are in the informal sector. So we're talking about women in the market, we're talking about women who are self-employed and making livelihoods for themselves. But then the second biggest priority, I would say, is gender-based violence. We have seen a lot of increase in violence. And when we say gender-based violence, it's really a cycle. If women are more subjected to female genital mutilation, they're more likely to be subjected to child marriage. And if they are subjected to child marriage, they're more likely to drop out of school. And if you drop out of school, you're more likely to not secure, a job with social insurance and in the formal sector. Yeah. So these priorities are being now on the table. Focus, I would say confidently that whether at the continental level or at the national level, because also of the drive of civil society, because of the young people and young activists and their call for these issues to be on the table, they are on the table right now. The way we are addressing them is not with the speed of their impact on women. So if we really want to protect women in a timely manner, we need to put those policies in place quickly, and we need to provide the resources for these programs to be implemented.
Yeah, I like the statistic that you used earlier on the number of jobs that are being created on the African continent. It's one that I often use also as well from the African Development Bank. And you can imagine within those 3 million jobs that are being created, the majority of them would go to men, and therefore the disadvantage we're talking about is going to be perpetuated. So let's move on and talk about the remedies that are required. But perhaps before we do that, let's talk a little bit about where the greatest need is. And I don't know here whether it's a case of focus being shifted onto the rural women, or we should be talking about those who are in the urban areas. From your perspective as a young person and also as a person with the insight that you're getting from the African Union, where should we be throwing perhaps more resources first, especially as you say, we are in this pandemic?
I think we need to say we need to protect and empower and support the most vulnerable in our communities, because even, of course, in rural areas, there are double and triple challenges than other areas. But even in urban areas, we see informal settlements at the heart of cities in Africa who are suffering extreme poverty. We see, IDPs, internally displaced persons. We see refugees. We can talk about women with disability, with migrant women, refugee women, and so on. So I would just put all of this in one category, that the women who need the most support and attention and protection are the most vulnerable. Those who do not have access, those who cannot make livelihoods for themselves, those who have layers of marginalization because of your age, because of your status, because you are young, and you are female at the same time. So those where we need to put our resources. But also in Africa, I think now we need to focus on how do we, on a massive level, generate livelihoods. And some of the things we're talking about right now in the continent's African free trade area, what does that mean for women and youth? How does that benefit women and youth traders, whether it's digital trade, whether it's across borders? So there are opportunities out there, but we need to make sure that young women and youth are at the center of being the ones who benefit from the delivery of these frameworks and of these projects of the African Union, the 14 flagship projects of the Agenda 2063.
Yeah. So you are a young woman, and as you say, young women will definitely get marginalized in this institution, in these circumstances, unless we place particular focus. I wanted to ask you what you do in terms of your day-to-day job in making that difference that's required to ensure that young women are not left behind.
I always say I am an activist. I act. So if I see injustice, I speak up and act on it. So when I see my sister subjected to that, I speak up, because sometimes it's not a choice when women are subjected to the kind of violations and abuse and suffering that they're subjected to on a daily basis, even as simple as sexual harassment. But also in my space now, in leadership, in my space as the Youth Envoy, I make sure I open the door for more young women to be in this space. I make sure there are more young women on the table, not just to participate or tick a box, but to be taken seriously, to co-lead the process. And I always advocate for a concept of intergenerational co-leadership, because it's not about women or youth being seen, young women or youth being seen by the leadership as what do we do about it? It's an issue. It's the unemployed, it's the refugee, it's a negative thing that we need to fix. It's the problem. We need to start looking at this population, this youthful population, the solution, and start being together across generation, having a dialogue on the same table. So from my space, at least I can do that. I can facilitate that. I can convene and bring more young women to the space. And then they have agency. They can bring the issues. They know the best their realities and what they face on everyday basis, and they can shape the policies that will eventually, hopefully, result in implementation and in programs that will affect their lives and livelihoods.
Yeah, you certainly have a lot of energy, and I'm sure you will be able to expend it on the African continent to your greatest ability. But I wanted to ask you, because you are one part, as they say, sometimes in order to be able to win some of these contests, you need friends. You need to build coalitions. Let's talk about those. Where are you finding them? Are there some that are easier in terms of coming on board? And where are you finding resistance in those that you'd want to bring in as partners, but find perhaps they are not ready yet to join you?
Indeed, absolutely. I definitely agree with you. And our first partner are young people. So whatever we try to convene or try to mobilize or advocate, we make sure we have champions across the continent. As I said, the work starts from the community, has to be done in the community. And because of the digital divide, we cannot reach everyone online. So first partners are young people, the youth networks, the civil society organization, the young advocates. But also we try to find champions in governments as well. Now we have more and more young ministers on the continent. Recently, young minister in Chad, two young ministers were appointed, Minister of Gender, Minister of Youth. We have a young minister deputy minister in Namibia of communication. So we have champions all across the continent who are in government and who can also be the bridge between the young people in civil society and in private sector with the public sector. So in terms of resistance, I don't think so, because everyone actually wants the same thing. Everyone wants a prosperous, borderless, Africa, integrated Africa. It's just that we're not sitting to dialogue. So we need to bring everyone, whether with all sorts of voices to the table, radical voices, bold voices, political voices, and have a conversation. If we all have the same goal, then we should all be able to have a conversation. So I'm very grateful for all the allies and all the partners that we bring on board, and we debate with them how do we see things about the youth agenda and the women agenda.
I want to talk about how you are communicating and also how you are carrying forward the agenda. What mechanisms are you using to reach out to all your different coalitions that you need to get this fight done?
Where we use different channels. Of course, being at the African Union is an extremely important space. The African Union Summit, the Assembly, is an important space to advocate, to influence the processes. We have the Permanent Representative Committee, the PRC. It's an important space with all the ambassadors in Addis Ababa. We can work with on a daily basis and address all these issues and debate them. And then when we go out of the African Union and go to different ministries, our main counterpart is Ministry of Youth and Ministry of Gender to deal with young women. But then, of course, we have partners outside of Africa we need to bring on board, and we need to influence their programs as well from an African perspective. We cannot deal with African issues with a Eurocentric perspective or with US-centric perspective. So we need to make sure also we have all these partners in the process and in the conversation so they can also start to change and shape the way they put resources, they put the policies, they advocate. So it's in line with also our agenda.
Yeah, I think the future of young Africans is safer in your hands. Africa, of course, has 55 territories. You said the program that you are rolling out is in about 30, I think, unless if I am mistaken. I want to know when you will be all over Africa.
Hopefully soon. It's really the political will. The more we have political will, the more we have our member states really hand in hand to develop these national action plans, the more we will have the strategy across the continent. So if we've been able to do those in 5 years, I'm hoping before 2030, as we say, the Agenda 2030, we'll be able to reach the whole continent and have our national plans and reach gender equality.
Yeah. Now, we know for you to be able to do this work, you need resources. And of course, those resources can either be internal or they could be external. I wanted to understand the mechanisms through which you are able to mobilize outside support and the extent to which you have been able to get the support that you require from within the African Union itself.
So yeah, in the African Union, of course, we are going through the reforms. We've been going through the reforms of the Union. So of course, in terms of resource mobilization and how much you can mobilize now, there are new mechanisms and there are ceilings for what you can mobilize. But we are trying to really be innovative as much as we rely on internal resources for programs to continue to be sustainable within the Commission. We also rely on putting the resources directly in the hands of young women and women. So many of the programs, for example, I do in my office, I direct the partners directly to the networks that we work with, to the allies that you were speaking about, to the partnerships. So the resources don't have to, go a long way in order to reach impact on the ground. And I think we need to do more of that. We need to do more of the resources going on the ground and going to the community directly, rather than going through institutional bureaucracy, because that we know will take time. And we want, as a generation, as a young generation, we want change now. We want a speedy change and results. We want to see, our livelihoods really impacted. And I think resources and partners should put those directly in the hands of young women and women who are the ones driving the economies in their countries.
Okay, great. So let's move on and talk a little bit more now about I want your thoughts on the extent to which you said everybody is for the advancement of women. But I think there are some places where there's more advancement than other places. And you have to say then that is down to perhaps resistance, either in cultural norms or because of religion. So I'm going to bring in the issue of religion here. Is it playing a part in keeping women in spaces that have been defined for them for generations?
So just to clarify, everyone wants the same thing. It's about Africa. It's about moving Africa forward. But of course, it's not about, advancement of women, because there is a lot of resistance to, or there is maybe misunderstanding or misconceptualization of what gender equality means, because gender equality means that we all have equal opportunity, that we all are treated with human dignity. But, the resistance comes from a place where, oh, now, women want more rights. It's not about having more rights. It's because women have been struggling for decades and decades, fighting for democracy, for justice, fighting for just being, just being a woman in some contexts, in some cultures, in some areas. It's violated. That right of being and becoming is violated. So in terms of cultural norms, and of course, many of it justified by religion. So I wouldn't say religion is the issue, but many of the cultural norms are justified by religion in order to mobilize, a public view that yes, women should be treated this way, women should stay at home, women should not go to school, should not be educated. I myself, was subjected to some harmful practices on the Tunisian-Algerian borders. We had in our village a practice on girls that believed, it protects women and protect their virginity. And it's only because of your gender. And so many of it is really the psychological trauma that women go through because of cultural norms and because of what society project on women, that you grow up with it, and eventually you either end up standing up for your rights and building your confidence, running for office and seeking leadership positions and so on, or you end up really being traumatized and losing your livelihood. And I think those who resist women's rights and gender equality need to understand that without that, we cannot build our societies. You cannot exclude half of society, more than 50% actually of society. You cannot exclude the ones who, bring life. We give birth to life and we build generations. And so the understanding of gender equality needs to come to a place where we are fighting for all of us to have equal opportunities. We're not fighting for a group because of their gender to be, better than other group. But as far as of now, many women are treated as second-class citizens in their country, and that needs to change. All of us need to be equal citizens in our countries, before the law, before opportunities. When I go for interview to have a job, when I run for office, whatever I am doing, I have to be treated equally because of my competence, not because of my gender. So I'm hoping the resistance that comes from our cultural norms and the harmful practices that follows, that is justified by religious and voices that just want us to live in very dogmatic view of the word, need to open up their minds and try to understand why it's beneficial to have a young woman going to school, why it's beneficial to have a woman president, why it's beneficial to bring women to the table, because that will benefit all of us as a society.
I dare say this fight is in very, very good hands. Without a shred of doubt, we've run out of time. But thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and your insight. And Aluta continua, and may you win the fight. That's Aya Chebbi. She's the African Union Youth Envoy, and we were chatting there, as you heard, about very, very critical, clear things that ought to be done and mind changes that ought to be persuaded to think in a way that's different to what they've been used to over many years. But that's the program for today. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.